So, hello and welcome to another episode of the Sliding Doors podcast. If this is the first time you're joining us, where have you been? But this is kind of a look back at some of those kind of what if moments, those sliding door moments in life. We base it all around kind of the love, relationships, everything that kind of happens in our day-to-day lives. And this is just a look through it all, really. So, and I'm joined by my guest on this episode, Yannick. He is going to introduce himself now.
Yep, after a quick sip. So Yannick here. Thanks for having me on the show. So we know each other from back in Primark, which was a long time ago now. And since then, I've been doing multiple different things. Work for the government at the moment, doing cybersecurity, but I also run my own clothing line, which I'm sure we'll get into in a little bit.
That's great. So we'll kick straight into kind of the first category, and as is tradition, that is all around kind of love and relationships. So what's your kind of sliding door moment there?
I think I'll start with friendships, to be fair, and then move into how that affected sort of love life and stuff like that as well. So I do have a very tight circle of friends, friends that I've made over numerous years. One person that we both have in common, I guess, is Michael. And I've known him since I was about 11 years old. Been really close friends ever since. And sort of
is that how that's how you ended up getting in at Primark? Is that right? In terms of obviously, so Mike, for those listening that don't know, Mike is Mike Kettle, one of the many managers at Primark.
Famous one,
famous Mike, and very much so. But you, like you say, we know each other through Primark, and I very briefly line managed you, didn't I? I think in terms of during your time there, I think you were one of mine.
You were my first manager. Yeah.
Jesus, that's a throwback. But is that how you got into Primark, was through Mike?
Yeah, so he was already there, and I think I went away traveling for a bit, and I lived in Canada. And when I came back, obviously I needed some work, and he was working there and said there were applications ready to go out. So sort of got in, like you said, through that way. Just sort of helped me understand the process of the applications, and then there we were. I got in, and so continued that relationship through being with him through all of secondary school, and then working together. Ended up living together as well. So I spent a good chunk of my life in and around him, which is really great, and it helped us both, I think, develop in many different ways. And it's probably what pushed me into. He's always been a bit of like a, he likes to follow his sort of passions, whether it be music or he also does his thing with TikTok. So he's always followed his thing, and I think it sort of encouraged me also to be able to go out and do my thing, which ultimately is the fashion and clothing. But also,
do you want to shout it out? What's your brand name?
Yep, it's a Bonvi Apparel. So I can share a link with that with you.
We'll pop a link. We'll pop a link into the comments for those that are interested. I've certainly seen some of your stuff, and I think it's all great stuff, mate, in terms of what you're doing.
Thank you.
Sorry to have interrupted there, but I just give it a shout out. Let's get you some followers as well.
No, definitely, thank you. And vice versa, do the same for the podcast. And so again, I've used Mike as a model for that. So which is, he's been very helpful in that way. But also in terms of meeting my current partner, he was played a big role in that. Sort of, I was at a stage in my life where I wasn't really going out much or doing much. And so he was encouraging me to get out and about again. And that's why I ended up meeting my partner. And now we're actually at the stage where we're going to have our own child.
Wow.
So, so thank you. So we're sort of nearly 8 months into that process.
Wow.
So a lot of things have come out of that. I would say that friendship.
And it is. I think that's really, it's really interesting. Like you say, you don't tend to, when you stop and think about kind of those friends that are with you throughout, it is at those moments, like you say, where, and I'm sure everyone's gone through it. I can certainly relate to that in terms of that kind of, you stop going out for a bit, you kind of, you not, recluse is probably a bit too far, but in terms, you kind of remove yourself a little bit, and then, like you say, those kind of opportunities stop happening, don't they? That you kind of, you don't, because you're not going out, things don't kind of happen in that space. You don't meet people. You're not meeting different people.
Exactly.
It becomes a bit of a rut. And then, like you say, it's those good friends, those long-term friends that kind of really push that along, don't they? In terms of, like you say, Mike's helped you with your brand. He's helped you kind of push on in terms of kind of exploring that passion. Obviously, I'm presuming that's you've started a brand, so there's a passion there behind that, and obviously he's kind of helped push that, hasn't he? By the signs of things.
Yeah, 100%. I think our relationship has sort of been like that, where we can sort of confide in each other about things that we want to do, take ideas and actually be critical rather than just always, just always saying what we want to hear. I think he'll always be there to sort of say the negative aspects of it as well, or things that I should be looking at in a different way, which has been really useful, because you do sometimes tend to surround yourself with people that just say things that you want to hear. I think a lot of the time.
Yeah, I think that's a really good call out as well, in terms of, you need that type of friend that will challenge you, not just to go, yes, we've all got, and I'm sure that people listening will go, there's a handful of people you've got that are yes friends that will go, yes, let's go do this, let's go do that, or yes, that sounds like a good idea. But actually, you need those friends that go, but how are you going to do that? How does that happen? Because then that pushes you to think differently. It pushes you to reevaluate the idea. Because no one, apart from, there's obviously some kind of great people out there in history that do come up with good ideas straight off the bat. There's a number of us out here that will have come up with an idea, like I've come up with this idea, you've come up with your brand, that need that kind of second look at it, the fresh pair of eyes approach, as it's often called, to go, but what about this? What about that? And like you say, that only feeds into success, doesn't it? Hopefully.
Well, 100%. Yeah, I agree with that. And I think it's just understanding that, like you say, you might have a really good foundation for an idea. And I think we're never ones to shoot each other down and say that's not going to work. It's more about, let's find a way to make this work for each other, and give you the best tools necessary, really. So I think that's what he's been able to do for me. And I hope that he'll be able to say the same for me as well.
And just, you said you met kind of when you were 5, is that right? So was that school, or?
Sorry, it was about 11.
About 11.
Yeah. So yeah, secondary school.
And it just, you just went to the same school, just kind of met. Like, I find that really interesting, in that you go to school with a huge number of people, in terms of your, the chances of meeting that person, being friends with that person, and then that effect it has is like, is akin to winning the lottery, isn't it? Almost. You don't, I certainly reflect on school. There was, however many people in our year, only a handful then have kind of carried on into my adult life. And it's like you say, it's the same with you and Mike, isn't it? In terms of, I'm sure there's people that you went to school with that you aren't as friendly with, and it kind of is. I find it interesting that you built that relationship then in school, and it's carried on, and then obviously the knock-on effect that's had.
Yeah, definitely. It's like you say, it's a 1 in a million, really. I think we literally became friends pretty much immediately, I would say, as well. Which again, I think is a bit rare. You tend to sometimes go through school, go for a few years, and then meet people that you sort of gravitate towards to later on. I think those initial friends sometimes are the quickest ones to fizzle out. But yeah, it wasn't the case with this. I mean, like any friendship, it you probably have times where you're not as in communication with each other, especially as you get into sort of the later end of the 20s that we're in now. Careers, buying houses, having kids, doing things like that. You tend to drift apart sometimes, but we've always managed to keep we've always managed to keep a line of communication, I would say, open, and we have one of those friendships that you can go a week or two without speaking, and you don't ever have to really address it. which I find, being an introvert at times, it's good not to have to justify every reason for not communicating.
I'm absolutely with you there in terms of I've done kind of multiple work-related tests and stuff, and it's always come out that they consider me to be an extreme introvert, and I fully get that piece around. I'm sure there'll be a lot of men that relate to that in terms of, like you say, when we get to this particular stage of life where we're kind of, like you say, we're fine, we're a bit more established in our careers, we're a bit more established in life in terms of relationships and houses and all the kind of quote unquote adult stuff that we start to progress towards. I would say certainly in it's prevalent in yourself, myself, I'm sure in every other men kind of listening. It's natural. I think we all kind of, like you say, you can go years, however long. But you've got that foundation there, haven't you? You've got that kind of, like you say, you can instantly pick that back up with a message out of the blue to go, "Hi mate, how are you doing?" And it's back to normal, isn't it? Not saying certainly obviously in Mike's case, Mike, but generally with men and friendships, we do tend to kind of drift apart a bit more, don't we? And it can certainly be like that.
Definitely. I think, like you said, at this stage of life, you just sort of fall head first into all these different situations, and they can be really overwhelming. And sometimes as guys, we do tend to shut off or keep it to ourselves, and we don't tend to communicate absolutely everything, I would say. But yeah, it's good to know that when I do need that, or when he does need that, then it is there. And then in terms of relationships as well, I think with my current partner, we're very open like that. We're very good to discuss on the issues we have. And I think in terms of friendships and relationships, communication is absolutely 100% vital. So yeah, just because it's infrequent, it doesn't mean the quality of that conversation or that communication isn't good.
No,
sometimes over talking and over communicating can be a problem as well.
Absolutely. I think that's a really good share. And on to kind of our next category. So this is all around work and kind of career. So thinking about that, what's your kind of sliding door moments there?
I think going to Canada when I was about 18 when I left. It was just a random moment or decision. I didn't want to go to university, so I opted to just travel for a bit. It wasn't meant to be a long time, but when I landed there, I sort of met some family that I didn't know I had, and built some really good relationships and friends, and I just ended up staying out there for about 2 years.
Wow. Okay.
Sorry, my phone battery is dying there.
Okay.
So I ended up going to college out there, studying just marketing, and my intention was probably to stay out there for a couple more years, get my citizenship, and end up moving there. But at the same time, I did miss my family and friends here too much. Hindsight, I think I probably would have stuck it out for another year, and got my citizenship, and then had that door open. But I didn't. I was sort of 20 years old. All I wanted to do was come home and party and have fun and do the stuff that my friends were doing here. So I didn't do that. And I think that was like a moment, but it also helped in terms of when I did get my first job with the government. The thing that set me apart in the application process was the fact that I had made that move, and done something independently, which just showed them that I could, make decisions that wasn't just following the crowd. And doing something that probably put me at, quite a bit of discomfort. So I think that would probably be my sliding door moment.
So where just on where did you stay in one particular bit of Canada? Did you travel around, or like is always somewhere that it's somewhere I've never been, but it's somewhere that's always intrigued me. And that's, I'll be honest, it's based off the fact that I like wrestling. So I know that sounds really
nothing wrong with that.
A lot of wrestlers were, back in the day were from Canada, and it's always been a country that's probably been in my headspace, but not somewhere I've never been. So I've always been kind of intrigued, and I'm always intrigued when someone's been there to kind of hear about experiences, what it was like, just kind of generally just run us through that if you don't mind.
Yeah, no worries. So I lived in Toronto.
Nice. Yeah.
That's where I spent most of my time. I did travel around a bit. So I did Vancouver, I've done Montreal, and I used to go there a lot as a kid because my dad's sister lived out there.
Okay.
So we used to go every summer holidays for like 4 to 6 weeks. So I had a familiarity with it.
Mm.
But then as I got older, I just felt that sort of need to go back as an adult and just live a bit more independently, as not going with my dad on a holiday type thing.
And it was it's a very formative age, I would say, in terms of, it's a very bold decision. So I ultimately commend you for that. I think that's not many people make that decision at 18. And like you say, it's obviously then helped in your later, like you say, your later career. That's a really good example to an employer of someone who's got a bit of a mind about them, got some sort of personal integrity. And I think certainly it runs parallel for me. I made a similar decision, I guess, around 21. I had been in retail by then for a few years. I decided to give it all up to go to Vegas.
Nice.
So again, not a place people generally go for travels. I wouldn't, people go for holidays. And then I came back, and it gave me that clarity of mind of not necessarily where I am now, because I'm not, like I say, I'm in HR now, but it gave me that clarity of mind that I didn't want to be in retail forever. It kind of gave me a different opportunity. I ended up working in hospitality for a bit, then went back to retail, just to because that's where my skill set was. And that's how I met you guys. So, it all roads lead somewhere is the approach I've taken. But I think, it's certainly from my perspective, mate, that is a great kind of shout of like you say, knowing your own mind, knowing kind of what you want to do, and actually it's not something that you would kind of historically think that would go into your work, but actually I think certainly from a government perspective. So I've worked for a government department before. It is all about that life experience piece as well. It's not just about they don't look just for skills on a page, because you could have 100 people have the same qualification. It's about that bit that stands out, isn't it?
It definitely is. Yeah, I think character development is such a vital thing that comes out of traveling. I think you'll agree with that. And just broadening your horizons, being able to see things from different perspectives. Especially, I wouldn't say Bristol is a small town, but it's small enough. Like if you stay here for long enough, you have that sort of small town mentality sometimes. And I never understood what that meant until I really did go and travel and see places and understand that not everybody lives the way we do.
No.
And there's different paces of life, and I wouldn't understand what that would meant if I hadn't experienced it in other places. And the importance I'll just put on family and friendships over work sometimes. Whereas over here, I think we are very sort of driven into work is all, and everything falls after that.
I was just going to say, like that driven piece is exactly what was on the tip of my tongue. In Bristol, I think in particular, and probably to a greater extent London, not that I've kind of ever lived there, but I get the impression that we are one of those cities where the driven aspect of our work kind of relationship, or our relationships with work, are absolutely paramount. We kind of spend a lot of our time working, and kind of that it shows in terms of how busy Bristol can be at times, in terms of just how manic the place is. And then, like you say, you go somewhere else, and certainly from my perspective, you go to somewhere like Vegas, you expect it to be equally 100 miles an hour, or 1,000 miles an hour even. And then it was completely opposite. Met with people that were not like that, and like they had that different outlook to life, different pace of life. And then you kind of come back and go, well, why am I doing it the way I'm doing it? Because it doesn't work that way everywhere.
I think that's the key thing as well, that it allows you to ask questions of yourself, because you've seen other people do it a different way. And you ask yourself, what do I really want from this? And I think that's a question that sometimes I get stuck with. Do I want to earn more money? Is that the main thing here? Or do I want to have a more comfortable lifestyle, or somewhere in between the two? So I think we're all, like you said, you're all trying to find that path that you're leading down. There's not necessarily a right way to go sometimes, but I guess you just got to follow what feels right. And at that point, traveling felt the right thing to do. And looking back on it, I've never ever regretted that decision. So it's something that I would recommend to anyone, especially young people that just don't know what they want to do next.
And in terms of then kind of, so we've kind of touched on that you work for the government now. How do you kind of get to, how did you get into that? How is that kind of a passion of yours in terms of, what talk me through that in terms of kind of what you do and why you like doing it, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, without slandering working in retail too much as well, I knew very quickly into it that it's just something that I just didn't want to do anymore. It didn't take me long, and I guess when you're doing something you really don't enjoy, the time really drags. It puts a strain on relationships. You're creating unnecessary stress for yourself. And I just heard about an apprenticeship that had come out at HMRC, and I thought, well, I was only 21 at the time, so I thought, well, the pay was good, and it was a chance to go and learn something new and get into everyone always talked about the civil service as a job for life type situation. So, and I have family members that work for the civil service, so they were all recommending going down that route. So yeah, I applied for the apprenticeship, and like the kind of the situation actually set me, when I got the feedback, that was the thing that set me apart and got me the job. And that was it. I just did my 2-year apprenticeship. It was a fixed term contract with no job at the end of it.
Okay.
But there was about 50 of us, and I think enough of us made that push to say, well, what's the point in investing all of this money into us and then not retaining us at the end of it? So there were some changes that had been made, and eventually I managed to land a role permanently, doing litigation for HMRC, which was again pretty cool. We've got to travel around, go to court, take tax cases. That was quite interesting, but very stressful, very time demanding. And then from there I've just shifted off and done something completely different in cybersecurity. And I think that's what the civil service has given me, is that ability to just shift into different things. So although I'm working for the similar type of employer, I can try many different types of jobs rather than just doing one thing.
And I think that's a great shout. So for those listening that maybe haven't worked for the civil service or aren't necessarily aware, it is massive in terms of kind of like you say, the jurisdictions of it, the kind of opportunities that are available. So I had kind of personal experience, I guess. I worked for the National Crime Agency as part of my kind of time with civil service. Again, kind of similar approach, really. Loads of people were going for the role. It was a fixed term role. How do you stand out? Well, you go, I want to come in at basically my kind of, like you say, the feedback I had was because I had said something in particular in the interview. They went, no, this guy kind of gets it. We'll come in, we'll do the right thing. Just wants the opportunity, isn't kind of seeing past that. So I got the job ultimately. Again, it was kind of made a bit like yourself. It was made perm. I think it's such a beast, the civil service, in terms of the opportunities that are available, but also if you're open to that, if you're kind of willing to be a bit flexible, a bit more kind of fluid in what you're doing. You're absolutely right. Job for life was always how it was presented to me as well. I think that's I considered a very old school view on it, but actually, it's still relevant for them in terms of kind of what. There's always work in the civil service. It's just what you're willing to do, isn't it?
Yeah, it's never ending. There's always something to do. But yeah, I think the key thing for me is that there's always different opportunities. And when I do get, too stressed out in a role, or I'm not finding enough challenge in a role on the other end of it, then there are plenty of opportunities to move around. And I think that's been a really important thing for me. I think experiences with friends and work is that a lot of them get tied down in careers they really don't like, and they just see no way out sometimes. And I haven't felt that working for the civil service.
Yeah, I think I agree. You tend to get certainly, from my experience in retail, you get to a certain level and then it becomes harder to get out. And it's harder to start again once you're on a certain amount of salary, and then, like you say,
Yeah,
before you know it, another year's passed, another year, and before you're there a longer time than you maybe intended. So you're right to
yeah,
absolutely call out retail. I think, but at the same time, I think it's a badge of honor for those that have done it, in terms of, like, I think it very quickly makes it stand out that if that's not, if it's for you, great. I think there's a lot of people, myself included, yourself included, that you do your time, you get out, and then you can kind of look back on it and go, yeah, it wasn't for me.
definitely. I think you're right. Obviously, we probably both have good friends that are still in retail,
Yeah.
and they don't feel the way that I felt about it. So,
No.
it's each to their own, definitely. I just like having that fluidity. And I think, yeah, like you say, there's this one-way system in retail. It's just you're trying to go up, up, up. And the main goal is really how much can I earn,
Mm.
which is great, because yeah, money is all important. But I like having flexible working. I like, um, you know, being able to do this in the middle of the day.
Yeah,
Um, things like that, I think for me are priceless.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really great share. And we'll move on to our third category now, which is always the one that gives me a little bit of fear, because it's the wild card category, and I know very little about it. So it's over to you on this one.
Okay. I think I just wanted to go back into travel, really, if that's
Mhm.
okay with you. And for me, not just about Canada. Every single time I think I've hit a bit of a snag in life, I've tend to combat it with travel.
Yep.
So one of my more recent trips just before COVID hit was Vietnam,
Nice.
and yeah, and I only spent 2 weeks out there, which is probably my regret. I think I would have spent at least a month, because I did travel south to north. Um, so the travel time alone didn't make the 2 weeks worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course.
Um, but yeah, it was just a sort of quick stop in every sort of major location, 2 days. Um, just seeing the difference there again when we spoke about a different way of living, just the way they view life. I think I always make a point of speaking to people when I'm out there, just understanding their views, and how they go about doing things. And yeah, just really interesting. Family
Mm.
is the number one for them out there. I found that they're all really healthy, all in really good shape. That all comes down to diet. And yeah, it was just really interesting to see that. And it definitely put into perspective for me. Again, I'm the kind of person that does need sun, does need good food. So I think, eventually it's got me thinking, do I want to be here forever?
Yeah.
Probably not. Want to go somewhere. I want to build towards something where I can live in a nicer climate. Um, and just naturally eat healthier food, because you're in those places. It's a lot harder to do here, I think. And I commend anyone that's able to eat really healthy and train and do all of the things here while we maintain this really hectic lifestyle of just working all the time.
It is.
So
And you're right. I think what, well, one, first and foremost, that I think that's a great shout. And two, that healthy lifestyle kind of split compared to, in different locations. I think, like you say, when you're um when you're on a budget, and the budget is, you have a pound to buy some food, I can buy, a very small amount of fruit, prepackaged fruit, for a pound, or I can buy a multi-pack of chocolate bars, for example, which is
yeah,
going to keep me more sustained for longer. Probably the fruit, but ultimately the chocolate's going to last me a couple of days. So do
yeah,
you see?
for me it's a lot easier.
And I
Yeah,
just think, yeah, you're right. That there's something fundamentally that, if it can happen elsewhere, why can't it happen here? That's not for me and you to answer. That's obviously for kind of the wider world to answer. But I just think,
yeah,
that is a really good kind of cool, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of people listening that will probably have the same kind of idea around that. They're do we want to stay in one place forever? Some people will. Some people will be quite happy with maintaining that, like I say, maintaining their level of fitness, their level of kind of healthy living, and kind of be quite comfortable. And then there's people that will know what kind of is available in other countries and will seek to kind of aim there. And I think, if I'm really honest, from my perspective, do I foresee myself living in a different country? Probably not. But I think there's certainly different ways I'd like to live. I very much live in the city at the minute. I probably see myself more by the sea as I get older, in terms of, and I think that's quite a historical British thing, isn't it? But I think
Yeah.
I think you see it as kind of a way of life, don't you? I think a way of life change is absolutely, like you say, a really good kind of sliding door moment of, do I want to do the same thing I'm doing year in, year out? Probably not.
No, yeah. I mean, it can become very much a grind, and I have enjoyed it. It's not all bad, but yeah, I just like to constantly think in a way of like, what am I building towards? And yeah, if I'm just building towards being in the same place in 5 years, I've always had a problem with that. So it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a drastic change, but like you say, it could be, just moving that slightly bit further out. And you never know what life has in store. I have these ideas of moving. Doesn't mean that life necessarily has that same plan for me. So we'll see how it goes. But yeah, for me, I think, just that change of lifestyle. I think I've tried to work hard to reach that. So, I do a 4-day work week, for example, which has really benefited my life in many ways. And then, it's given me the time to go and then pursue my passions with the clothing and things like that, which is invaluable, I think. When you do get locked into something, it's really hard to find time for anything else.
And it's only going to help you build, like I say, is something that kind of has always stuck with me, I guess, is that mentality of kind of working backwards. So kind of, and it came from what I would foresee quite a lot of 30-something men's kind of guru, I guess, in The Rock. He was kind of, and I don't know why it stuck out to me, but he mentioned sometime somewhere about working back from that end goal. So kind of going, right, this is where we want to be, and then working back from that. And I think he said it around, again, the kind of the wrestling reference. They would always kind of work back from where they wanted to end up. And I think that then kind of stuck with me of, right, that's where I want to end up. So how do I get to that? Well, actually I need to do this, and then I need to do that. And I think that's certainly it sounds like what you've just described to me there is, you have a very similar approach in terms of, you want to get, what a better life looks like in terms of healthy living, way of life, all these things from obviously your travels. And actually the way to get there is work back from that. Well, how do I get there? It's about being secure in work. It's about adjusting your work pattern to fit exploring your other passions. That then builds up, that helps get to kind of where you want to go, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a really good way of putting it, the working back method. And I guess I haven't really thought about it in that sense before, but analyzing what I probably have done in my life, it has been that. It has been going somewhere, seeing something I really like and saying, how do I obtain that? And then, taking the relevant steps. I do like to break things down into steps. It just makes it less disheartening. And, it's when you're seeing something that seems so distant, it can put you off. And I think many people stop there thinking it's unrealistic, it's unobtainable. And, I think the main thing is just getting started, and one step at a time.
Exactly that, mate. So when I and again, to give us a small example, I remember having a similar conversation with my wife when I was kind of making the move into HR. It was like, what end goal do I have here? Well, I want us to ultimately then be able to have more children. I want us to kind of be around on weekends. I want to have that work-life balance. Well, that was the goal. So how do I get there? Well, probably not going to get there staying in retail. Probably need to do something different. What do I like about retail? Well, kind of like the people bit. So again, that's kind of step one. I like the people bit. Right, step two, how do I get into making my job about people, well, that's HR. So that's step two, and then step on, step on, step on. How do we get to that level of life to kind of get to that end goal? And I don't think anybody ever gets there, with the exception of
No.
The Rock. But we stay on that journey, and obviously that, I think it's all about breaking it down, isn't it? Making it achievable.
Yeah, and I think you said that there is probably, there's an end goal in your mind, but I think when you get there, you would just move it.
Yeah.
So, and it would be something different. It's just, I guess it just keeps you active and it keeps you doing things and keeps you, because if there was something and you get there tomorrow and you just stop, then what is there? So
Yeah.
I think that's the thing. It's just keeping on top of things, just exploring the ideas that you have, the passions, testing it out. There's always going to be a reason not to. There's probably sometimes a lot more reasons not to than to do something. The financial cost of things, the time elements, all these burdens that you put on yourself by pursuing something. But if you don't, you'll always have that lingering question as to, what would have happened if I did it. So yeah.
So for regular podcast listeners, this is normally where we stop the episode. But because this one is going to go out on New Year's Eve, I have just kind of thrown in a bonus question on this episode, and thankfully you've been nice enough to think of an answer for me. So this isn't a surprise for you, hopefully. So
we'll see.
We're going to move into kind of a sliding door moment on or around kind of New Year's. That could be resolutions. That could be New Year's nights out. It's kind of any kind of New Year's related sliding door moments that you may have.
Yeah, I think New Year's, I've spent it in many different places. So for me, the sliding door moment was definitely one of the New Year's I had in Canada, and just sort of waking up in a different place. And I think that realization finally hit me that I'm not home. And it was it wasn't like a wonderful start to the new year. It was more of like I felt like I really wanted to go back at this point. And I remember just looking around at people around me thinking, these aren't the people I grew up with. This doesn't feel how it should. And yeah, just overcoming that. And I think spending the next, I think as a teenager, you can sometimes, I definitely was very sort of fragile and very, I want to go home. And I remember kicking up a bit of a tantrum, and not really having the money to get back. So, my dad sort of convinced me to spend a few more months out there. I think, the harsh winter can really make you think differently. He said, just see it through until spring and see if you change your mind. And I think that New Year sort of taught me, because I did stick it out, and I had the time of my life after that. Was when it does get really difficult sometimes, you just have to stick through it and grind through sometimes, and on the other side of that sometimes is exactly all the stuff you would have missed if you just gave up.
You're absolutely right in terms of, so for me, and this is why I kind of asked you this question, I guess, because I find New Year's a fascinating concept in terms of how people perceive it, as it's either this day one and we're going to be a completely different person on January the 1st, or like you say, it's kind of the expectation of a good night out. It's been, and I think you get to this kind of age and you've had probably a number of those experiences, in terms of you've probably had the expectation of a good night out, you've had a bad night out, you've had, we're going to change things on day one, we're not going to, you've had kind of all the range of kind of New Year's experiences by this point.
Yeah.
And I think, for me, I get that in terms of that whole kind of, it being not necessarily, I'm not happy, I'm not this. I've already had that in terms of, so like I mentioned earlier, I spent kind of a year when I came back from Vegas working in hospitality, working in a pub, and I loved it. Don't get me wrong, I wouldn't have stayed there that long if I didn't. But at the same time, working over the kind of festive period there, working a Christmas Day, working a New Year's Eve, and whilst it was really busy, it just wasn't. You then spend that New Year's countdown, if you like, with ultimately people you're serving, people that are drunk and you're not drunk, and two, people that you don't really not didn't like, but ultimately they're not your friends. They're
It's not who you want to be around.
yeah, they're people you
Yeah.
work with. Do I want to be around these people right now? Probably not.
No.
And that, you know, a couple of months, it gave me that push, I guess, to kind of start looking in retail again, start looking to go kind of back to what I knew. And that's when I got the job at Primark. And then that then sparks kind of, it's a management role, you know, pushes me into kind of management conversations in other retailers. It pushed me into managing people. It pushes me into HR. It's all these things of,
Yeah.
just by not enjoying that New Year's Eve, which I know sounds really strange in isolation, but actually I think it's very relatable what you're saying around you kind of, you know, I'm sure there'll be lots of people listening that will go, he spent a New Year's in Canada, that would have been awesome, and have that you know, that opinion of it from the outside, that must have been an amazing experience. And I'm sure you'll agree that it was an amazing experience, but at the same time you're probably there thinking they don't have the context of how you were feeling at the time, do they?
Definitely. And I think you know, hindsight, looking back on it, I definitely appreciate that moment that I had then, and not having that moment, I probably wouldn't be sat here right now having this discussion or doing the work that I've been doing. So I think you have to experience all of these things. You can't experience the good without the bad. Same with you. I think it's like a butterfly effect. You sort of had that bad moment in that New Year's Eve and you thought, I want this to change. And it's led on to wholesale change, but you can't picture that wholesale change at the time. And it goes back to the small steps we talked about. You sort of, by getting into the management from there, you sort of said, what do I want to do? And it's around people and it's around this and what do I want for my life? And you can slowly put in place the building blocks. And I think I went through all the phases, like you said, with the New Year, New Me, and then going through criticizing the New Year, New Me movement. But then ultimately, I don't think I have a problem with it. It's more, you know, it can serve as a good kickstart to, you know, having a good year. And I have nothing against that if that's what people use as the baseline. But I do think, you know, you hit these moments multiple times in a year where you think that something has to give. So if you've reached that point, then, you know, you should make that attempt to give it a go and try something different.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna bring us to an end at that point. I think that has been a really good conversation. Do you want to just give a shout out to your brand again before we finish?
Yeah, it's a Bon Vie Apparel. I'll send the link over to you, and hopefully we can put it onto the YouTube.
Yeah, we'll pop that in the comments.
Yeah.
So thanks everyone for listening. If you can like, share, and subscribe, I'd really appreciate it. And Happy New Year.